Hey guys, welcome to Social Studies class. And today we are going to talk about the first of these great exploring kingdoms that changes the way we understand the map, and that is the Portuguese here in the Age of Exploration. The Portuguese, like this guy, Cristiano Ronaldo, great footballers, also great explorers. No, Cristiano Ronaldo is not an explorer. No, he's not on the test, but he plays for Portugal because he's Portuguese. So, they have a heritage of creating great men. Let's look at some of those who came about 400 years before Cristiano Ronaldo. The first of them, and the first one we want to look at, is this leader, because he's a visionary leader, a leader named Prince Henry the Navigator. Now, we've talked a bit about names here in social studies and how kings get names for their actions. We talked about Alexander the Great, and I think I might have mentioned my favorite named king, Ethelred the Unready. I don't know what he was unready for, but he wasn't ready for it, and I know. Henry the Navigator's name is a bit of a misnomer, because Henry the Navigator was not a navigator. I'm not sure if he ever got on a ship. What he did was he inspired other people to get on ships and go exploring. So maybe Henry the Rich Patron of Explorers would be a better name, but it doesn't have the same flow. So what Henry the Navigator does is he builds a school to train sailors. And he really encourages his small kingdom of Portugal to go out and explore and learn about the world around them. Portugal is on the coast, it's next to Spain. It doesn't have a lot of territory and land, so the only way Henry could try to really expand Portugal's territory and make it rich or great was to go exploring, was to go looking for colonies abroad. So the other thing to recognize is this is radical because nobody's done this in all of human history to a large extent. Now, there are earlier journeys, those the Chinese treasure fleet journeys. Obviously, the Indonesians were master mariners in the ancient past, and we kind of looked at their seafaring kingdoms and the ocean trade through the Strait of Malacca. But Europe had not gone exploring. As far as their maps were concerned, the edges of just off their coast is where you found those terms that said, "Here there be dragons." And as far as they were concerned, there were dragons. But Henry the Navigator is the first to go, maybe there aren't dragons. And if there are dragons, maybe the treasure those dragons are guarding is worth fighting dragons. So he inspires the Portuguese to travel farther, instead of just fishing off the coast, to go in search of new realms and new countries and new resources. And in the process, he sets in motion a chain of events that's going to change Europe and the rest of the world for all of history. The Age of Exploration really is a watershed because it brings the world into contact in a way it's never been before. Because they knew stuff came from other places. They'd go to traders from Venice and Italy and buy spices that made their food taste so good. Or gunpowder. Or this rare, wondrous thing, nutmeg. This simple spice that was said to be able to cure the Black Plague and was worth more than anything else on the planet. It came from somewhere, but they didn't know where. And so Henry wanted to find out, where does the nutmeg come from? I want to know. I want to discover it. And that drove him. That drove him to begin sending ships out in search of the source. And that simple thought, again, is going to drive the entire Age of Exploration, which is a crazy thought because it comes from Indonesia. It comes from a tiny little set of islands in Indonesia called the Banda Islands. It was the only place it was. And that simple little plant drove armies to go and colonize territories and led to wars and led to conquests and reshaped the world, this quest for nutmeg. That today tastes like Christmas to me because we put it in a lot of our kind of fancy celebration food. Kind of makes sense. It was really expensive at the time. But doesn't do much else, and that you can buy in a grocery store. It's one of the weird ironies that the things that used to drive people to kill and enslave are just on the shelves of Walmart now, being sold really cheaply. So let's dig in. So Henry the Navigator, again, founds this school. He trains people. He inspires people to go out on missions, and he's willing to put his money behind it. And that's huge because sending out a ship was expensive. You had to buy the ship. You had to pay a captain. You had to pay a crew. And often these journeys lasted for months or even years. So you needed to pay them for months or even years and to have all that money up front so that when they got back, they got paid. You also had to pay for the cargo. What were you going to trade if you made it there? If they find the nutmeg, what can we give them for nutmeg? We need to buy all that. And there's a huge chance that you are going to get nothing, zero, zilch, nada in return. Because what if a big storm blows up and smashes your ship? What if they get lost? Boop, and starve to death. What if they get attacked by pirates or cannibals or dragons? And so this was a hugely risky endeavor. Today we think, oh, whatever, exploration, trading, whatever. We do this all the time. Giant ships come from China all the time. We make everything China. Well, that's not how the world was. At this point, everything in Portugal was made in Portugal, except for a few things that got imported at really high prices. So this was a really risky, ambitious thing, but Prince Henry the Navigator said, I'm willing to risk my legacy on this. I'm willing to risk my fortune on this. I'm willing to risk my legitimacy as a king on this. And he sent out expeditions exploring. So what did they find, you ask? Well, there are a couple of explorers we need to look at. And number one is Vasco de Gama, because Vasco de Gama really is the one who sets this in motion. When Henry the Navigator needs somebody crazy enough and stupid enough to travel out for months on end in a tiny wooden ship that could spring a leak or sink or maybe bring you glory, without food, or at least without very good food, because there's no refrigerators. You got some salt and spices to try and make it last. But it was not good. The food was not good. And the chances of catching scurvy, because they didn't realize scurvy was a vitamin deficiency caused by the not good food, and losing your teeth or dying were extremely high. And sailors knew that sailing a long time was dangerous, but they really didn't know how dangerous. So Vasco da Gama was probably 3 parts crazy, 1 part heroic, and 1 part genius. Because he pulls it off. He goes and he travels away from Portugal and he heads south. And he doesn't know what he's going to find. He goes beyond the edge of the map. He goes past what the flat earthers would call the edge of the world. And not flat, spoiler alert, so he doesn't fall off. That was another maybe fear, although again, not too many people actually believed the world was flat at this point. They kind of had it figured out. But nobody knew, and so he goes off the edge of the map and into the unknown and travels around the coast of Africa. Because Europe knew Africa was there. Rome had control of parts of Africa. So that wasn't new. And trade with Africa wasn't new, but going around it, no one had ever even really dealt with South Africa, not to mention getting around it. Again, as far as they were concerned, the Sahara Desert was this basically impenetrable barrier, and whatever was down there was full of cannibals and dangerous diseases. Scary. So Vasco da Gama just sails. He just sails down the coast of Africa, and he keeps going, and he keeps going, and he keeps going, and he tries to get food wherever he can, and he fishes, and his men fish wherever they can, and they put into ports and trade things for food wherever they can, and pray that they don't run into cannibals, but they run into friendly people instead. And they establish some sort of trade posts along the way, and they get to the southern tip of Africa, and all of a sudden they can't go around Africa South anymore, and they go around the Cape of Good Hope, which I believe used to be called the Cape of Storms. Basically, until this point, no one had ever been around it, and it was terrifying, because even today, if you go down past South Africa, the waves are crazy strong. It's a really dangerous passage of water. So he turns in, he manages to slip around it, his ship does not get destroyed, but it's pretty hectic and crazy for a while. And then he heads up the coast of Africa because he doesn't want to go to the middle of the ocean and get lost and die. And he goes up the coast of Africa, and he makes more discoveries, and he meets more people, and he says, hey, I'm Portuguese, welcome, join us, be friends, and here's a gift from the Portuguese king, and here's a gift from the Portuguese king, and again, keeps praying that he doesn't get eaten, and eventually jets off from Africa, sails across the Indian Ocean, and lands in India. And makes trade with India, and he finds India, and he fills his ship full of awesome stuff from India, spices and tea and all that good stuff that everybody loves. Maybe some cotton. luxury goods. Well, at the time they were. And he sails back. And when he returns to Portugal, the first European to ever go around Africa, the first one to prove you can get to India by sea. You don't have to take the land route. You don't have to trade with the Muslims who were charging an exorbitant price and who the Christians were still not happy with because of the Crusades. You can cut them out by going around Africa. It's this amazing thing, and Europe is going crazy. And that is 1497. Everybody's minds are blown. It opens up a whole new world of possibilities and options. So de Gama really sets the Portuguese on the map because that gives the Portuguese a claim to all these coastal towns in Africa and India and the first pick. Now, as soon as he goes, everybody else is like, I want to go around Africa. I want to go around Africa. I want to go around Africa. Now they know they can do it. All sorts of other captains suddenly are brave and want to go, and so other countries will quickly follow their route and try to claim their own trade posts on this way, and their own things, and it becomes this race to take control of key ports and establish trade with rich kingdoms, as different countries do, still searching for the nutmeg, because Vasco de Gama never makes it to the Andes. Now, because of this race, Portugal runs into a problem, because they have a friend called Spain, and Spain is right next to them. They're not really friends at this point. They're actually kind of totally not friends at all. Spain is not too keen on this. Spain has a bigger land area, but they also have a lot of coast, and they also have fleets, and they also want to control trade. They're the ones who Christopher Columbus sails out in 1492 and finds the America. Again, looking for nutmeg. Thinks he's in India, well, in the Indies, why he calls them Indians. He's very, very wrong. We'll get there later. But he finds that for Spain, he goes west. The Portuguese go south and east. They're both trying to get to the same spot because they both know that they can get there. Again, they don't think the Earth is flat. But this causes conflict. The two countries are rivals, and they're at each other's throats, and the Pope decides, I've got to do something about this. Remember, we just got done with medieval Europe, talking about how powerful the Pope is. The Pope is still powerful, especially in Spain and Portugal, which are both Catholic kingdoms. And so the Pope goes, I have a solution. Let's look at his solution. It's called the Treaty of Tordesillas. And at the Treaty of Tordesillas, what happens is Portugal and Spain get together, and the Pope decides, I'm going to cut a line down the map and decide what is Spain's to conquer and what's Portugal's to conquer. Because, I mean, why would we care about what England wants or France wants or Germany wants or any of the people living in these halves of the world? And so the Pope draws a line down the middle of the world and cuts the world in half. And he says, here you go. And he says, everything west of this line is Spain's, and everything east of this line is Portugal's. Now, you will notice that in terms of the Americas, that is very, 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 very biased in Spain's favor. All Portugal can get is this tiny sliver of Brazil, which gets pushed back at a later treaty on the thick purple line. And that's why Brazil speaks Portuguese, because it is a Portuguese colony. It was. Now it's an independent country. But the rest of South America mostly speaks Spanish, whereas Brazil speaks Portuguese, because that was the line. That meant the Portuguese had to go east, but that meant the Portuguese got to have control of all the ports in Africa, trade in the Middle East, India. In fact, they're going to hold on to Goa in India until 1975, and prime access to the Spice Islands of Indonesia. And you'll notice, if you know your Indonesian geography, that actually basically all of Indonesia falls in the Portuguese sphere of influence, which means the nutmeg is technically given to the Portuguese by this treaty, but it's not going to be that simple, and we'll get there when we get to the Spanish, because nobody knows where the second line is. It's on the other side of the planet. They don't have accurate globes, they don't have satellites. It's imaginary, as far as they're concerned. There's a line somewhere on the other half, which falls into Portugal's domain, but convincing people of that is not so easy. Proving that is not so easy. So when we get some later explorers and they find the bandas, the Spanish are going to get there and be like, well, surely this is in Spain's territory, not Portugal's. It's totally in Portugal's. But again, lines drawn on the map by a pope generally don't determine real life. And again, nobody consulted the Indonesians, the Chinese, the Indians, anybody from the Middle East or Russia or South America. or even the other European powers in this, so it's not exactly a binding document, but it is going to drive the explorations of Spain and Portugal in different directions, and that's why, again, the Spanish will attempt to go west, hoping to find them that way, and the Portuguese will go south and east. So one more Portuguese great explorer. I will try to wrap this up in 5 minutes so this video doesn't get too long, but that is Alfonso de Albuquerque. Let's repeat that. Alfonso de Albuquerque. Number one, when I grew up, all I knew of Albuquerque was a city in New Mexico, and I thought it was a really funny name. Albuquerque. Apparently, he was kind of a big deal in Portugal. Found that out later. He's actually got the nickname the Lion of the Seas. You could just call him a sea lion, but anyway, the Lion of the Seas, because he was this great conqueror. He went and led Portuguese armies conquering major port cities throughout Southeast Asia, including Malacca, which was at the time the greatest trading city in the area that we now call Indonesia. Now, it's technically on the coast of Malaysia, so, don't feel too bad about it. But he conquers what at that time is the dominant city in the area and establishes Portuguese control. When he does that, he breaks the control of the local sultanates that have taken root there at this point, and makes Portugal the major power in the spice trade. Taking over Malacca is huge. He also assaults Ormuz. At one battle, he's outnumbered 50-1, and he uses superior technology and bravery to achieve great triumphs. Again, he's going to conquer some things in India. He's going to conquer key ports on the Strait of Malacca. Again, there is no Singapore at the time, but Malacca was like the Singapore of the time, and he takes it over and establishes Portuguese dominance there to dominate the trade. Really cool, really impressive. Maybe someone whose name I shouldn't be making fun of, but when I was 7, I didn't know the difference. So Alfonso de Albuquerque is going to really push the Portuguese forward, and he's going to do it violently. That's important. Everybody's going to come. Be like, we're trying to find the spices. We want to trade. We're friendly. But bam, bam, bam. We have guns. And that's important. The Portuguese do not really come in as friends. The Portuguese come in, especially under Alfonso de Albuquerque's guidance, as conquerors. They are interested in taking the spices by force. And if you want to trade with them at their terms, great. But if you try to bargain, they're going to stick a gun in your face. And they're going to take what they want, take what they think is theirs. So what Alfonso de Albuquerque does, besides basically being a pirate who worked for the Portuguese to establish their control of this trade, or an enforcer, if you prefer, is he establishes for the Portuguese, and he leads them on their endeavor, which is to create a trade post empire. Now, what do I mean by this? Again, let's go to this map. I mean it's a trade post empire because outside of Brazil and a couple of things in Africa, the Portuguese almost never take land. They almost never try to actually control large swaths of inland territory, to occupy colonies. You also might note there in green, East Timor is taken by the Portuguese, and that is controlled for a while. But almost all of these things are small islands or they're cities. So almost all the Portuguese colonies are not colonies proper. They're just one port trade city that they've taken over. And they fortify that city, and they take it from whoever was in charge there, and whoever's in charge there can trade with them at their port city. And whoever's in charge there can trade with everybody else through their port city if they'll pay the tax. Rather than needing large standing armies, which Portugal didn't have, it's a tiny country in Europe, it doesn't have that many people. Rather than having to occupy territories and control people, unlike the Dutch who will eventually wind up getting inland of Indonesia, or the British or others who took massive colonial swaths of empire and had to administrate them, the Portuguese are trying to keep their costs low. All they're doing is fortifying these ports, and they can protect them with their ships, because their ships can go to the ports with their cannons, and if an enemy oppresses them, the fleets of Portuguese ships show up, the cannons support the port, drive away the enemy, and then the enemy has to sue for peace. They're able to use a minimal amount of troops to get a maximum benefit by controlling all these key trade routes throughout Southeast Asia. Again, I'm going to zoom in and just mention some of those. Goa in India, Calcutta, which is Calcutta, one of the largest, most significant cities in India. Bombay, Mumbai, again, one of the largest, most significant cities in India. Ormuz and Muscat, which would be controlling the trade coming from the Middle East. They're not exactly where they are, but any trade from what now would be Dubai or Abu Dhabi or any of those regions would be going through there. some along the coast of Africa. You have Malacca, which again is right near Singapore. You have Macau, which is one of the big, see mostly in China now, but kind of like Hong Kong. They've got a post with Nagasaki, so they could trade all the way to Japan. They controlled Ternate, one of the major spice islands, and near the Banda Islands, and they had East Timor, also giving them access to really to the spice islands, the part of Indonesia that anybody cared about at this point in time. And so what they've done is they just choice picked all the best spots basically, and said we're going to take this and we're going to establish it, and they're trying to minimize their manpower. For a long time, this works. They don't have the most successful empire. They will go into decline. Actually, one of the reasons that an earthquake strikes and a tsunami destroys Lisbon, their capital, in the 1700s, and the Portuguese really don't ever recover from that because they're just devastated at home and then they can't protect their colonies. But in the early days, they're in the lead and they have the advantage and they take that prime position, and everybody else then is chasing the Portuguese, trying to get access to these places, trying to get whatever ports are left and trying to do what they can. So let's finish with a quote from Albuquerque because primary sources are valuable, and let's see what he said himself. He said, "If we drive them, the Muslims, of this their ancient market there does not remain for them a single port in the whole of these parts where they can carry on their trade in these things. I hold it as very certain that if we take this trade of Malacca away out of their hands, Cairo and Mecca, which were the capitals of the Muslim empires at this point, are entirely ruined. And to Venice, which was a rival of Portugal in these trades, who'd been making tons of money off of this in Italy, will no spices be conveyed, except that which her merchants go and buy in Portugal." Alfonso de Albuquerque. And there it is. I'm not making it up. That's his plan. We're going to take control of the source. We're going to block the trade. We're going to cut out the Middle East and the Muslim kingdoms there. We're going to cut out the Italians in Venice. And we are going to become the ones who control the spice trade and the prices. And we are going to be the ones who get to make money off of it. That was Portugal's goal. And Portugal, for a short while, succeeded really well at it until they were kind of overrun by larger, more powerful, and more significant colonial powers. But for a brief period of time, Portugal ruled the world, just like Cristiano Ronaldo is so good at soccer. But he's not as good at Messi. Remember that. Have a great day. If you have any questions, bring them to our Zoom. See you guys later.